Okay, and we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the live chat for this Wednesday. It is the first live chat of 2023 for January 4th. And of course, I know what everyone's asking, what everyone's wondering. Where's the snow? And what's with these 60s and 70s, right? So today, we had temperatures push into the 60s and 70s. It was 70 degrees around Atlantic City on January 4th. And I know, everyone's wondering, is winter canceled? Is winter over? And the short answer is no. There's a lot more winter to come. This pattern, this specific pattern right now, is it warmer than what I thought it would be that I would see this winter? Well, I never expect record warmth, or in the other case, I never expected to have the coldest Christmas in 30 years either. So it has been a volatile winter by all accounts. But in terms of snow production, obviously it has been less than impressive. And the reason why, as we all know, is because of the timing of interaction of short waves. So where do we go from here? Well, let's look at some of the observations, and as you can see right now, it is incredibly warm. And I start with the surface map just to give everyone a heads up. If you're traveling tonight through tomorrow morning, there is some pretty dense fog that's already starting to get itself established here with some showers. So definitely watch out for the visibility if you're heading out tonight or tomorrow morning, as that's going to be a factor, and some of this fog will be locally dense before we get our cold front close enough to the region to start to scour out and get rid of the warmest air that we're probably going to see for this month. I hope I didn't jinx myself on that, but that's what I'm expecting right now. So where do we go from here? Well, we have to understand what is the forcing mechanisms, and we have to understand where we came from. So, let's go to Earth News School. And this mastering, powerful jet streak driving from China through Japan, through the Pacific, and into the West Coast is what is currently dominating our weather pattern. What caused that jet streak was a combination of two things. One, the stratospheric warming and stretching of the polar vortex came to an end right around, I'd say, the Monday before Christmas, right about there. And that allowed the polar vortex to start to strengthen. And as a result, what we ended up with was this rapid cooling. Let's see if I can pull up the right one for once. Here we are. Perfect. So, as a result, the stratosphere rapidly cooled, some of the coldest air that we've seen in some time at 10 millibars. I should point out this has nothing to do with the water vapor that is impacting down here. Okay? That is separate for right now. So we have the displacement still in place between what's going on in the mid-latitudes in the tropics and mid-latitudes in the southern hemisphere, and what we have in the northern hemisphere. But this feature up here, that cooling, was driven by the fact that we still have a relatively active sun, and that is allowing for cooling because of the disruption of ozone in the atmosphere. And as a result, the ozone impacts were allowing to cool the atmosphere rapidly, and so this is how we get where we are. In a normal year, without that volcanic influence, this would be a death knell for the winter. Okay, this would be kind of like what we had in 2009, 2010, where the stratosphere rapidly cools, and you end up with this 2019, 2020. Sorry. And the stratosphere rapidly cools, the polar vortex strengthens, and there's never any disruption and you end up with a very progressive weather pattern. And I believe that year produced about maybe an inch of snow in New York City, and I think like a half an inch of snow in Philadelphia. Not very good, and a early spring set in by the middle of February. And I believe March also featured above normal temperatures in that scenario. So are we dealing with the same scenario here? Well, as always, you can never, ever completely compare each season with each other. There's always different factors and different mechanisms. So there's been a lot of talk about the MJO. And when we take a look at the MJO, which I believe is right here, I've been pointing out, and several other meteorologists have been pointing out, that, hey, look, we're moving from the warm phases to the cold phases. Okay, so here's one forcing mechanism that is really important. Why? Because we know that La Nina is in a state of rapid weakening. This is the subsurface. It is rapidly warming. The La Nina state, as we can see from the CPC data, is trending towards a neutral state. The subsurface is also doing that. So we're seeing rapidly weakening La Nina at the same time with the MJO moving from phase 7, which is supporting this jet streak and just pummeling California, to phases 8, 1, 2, and 3, which are typically cold phases for the eastern United States. However, there's a caveat. The question now comes down is this. If you have a strong polar vortex that's just very powerful and has no signs of any type of stretching or weakening or anything of that nature, then those phases only support a very transient weather pattern, a very progressive weather pattern. So you end up with trough after trough marching across North America with influences from Pacific air masses and polar air masses. And sometimes you can end up with a snowfall event, but nothing is ever locked in. So you end up with short waves that are constantly on the move, and you don't get that really blockbuster storm. You get a lot of near misses, you get a lot of potential signals, a lot of potential, but no actual payoff, so to speak. And unfortunately, I know what you're thinking. So far, that's what we've been dealing with so far. So if the polar vortex remains strong, then we're in trouble. If you're a snow lover. If you're not, and you're ready for, you like to go out on your bike, and you like playing golf in February and January, then this might be great news for you. So what you're seeing is a lot of people, a lot of great meteorologists, outstanding meteorologists, and those who do a lot of research on this, saying, hey, look, yes, the MJO is going into these phases, but the polar vortex is strong, and we think it's going to remain that way, and so therefore, there you have it, right? There is their warm forecast, and that's how you get the warm solutions that you might see on the GFS solutions. The problem here, though, is that we're seeing a lot of signals that strong polar vortex scenario may not hold up. I say may because, as always, I don't like to jump the gun on these scenarios. So let me show you what I've been seeing here. First of all, I'm starting to notice that we're getting a little bit more convection setting up right around here. So this tells me that the MJO forecast is starting to develop, starting to show up here, where it's taking the convection here and starting to push it out towards 160 east to 180. And once it gets into phase 8 and 1, you're going to see a lot of convection to the south of Hawaii. So we're starting to see that now. That convection releases latent heat. That latent heat starts to influence this monster jet streak and starts to cause more support for a trough around the Aleutians and starts to basically amplify this jet. And instead of a fire hose heading right into the west coast, it starts to cause a lot of amplification and causing the ridges to build along the west coast and troughs around the Aleutians. And that ridge will then teleconnect into a trough in the east. So basically, this starts to lock in rather than constantly moving across the eastern United States. So that's the first key. The next thing that we're going to have to watch out for, and that we're starting to see, is, if I can find it, oh, here we are, the evolution of this ozone buildup. This feature right here is the start of warming. Not major stratospheric warming, at least not yet, but certainly the support for disruption. And more importantly, we are now seeing that support in the EP flux. Now, for roughly 7 days, if you go back, let me go back here to the 25th and submit. This is how the EP flux looked back on Christmas Day. Why is this important? Okay. In this scenario here, your warm air from the mid-latitudes does not get transported up to the higher latitudes in the stratosphere. So this signal here supports a strengthening polar vortex. And what it will do is that it will pull the Arctic air northward and set up a warm weather pattern like we're dealing with now. Now let's jump to today. And submit. And it's completely different. This is an important signal. This isn't a forecast 10 days out. This is the observation right now. What you're starting to see is more transport from the mid-latitudes of the troposphere to the higher latitudes of the stratosphere. This is a signal for, at the very least, stretching of the polar vortex. And if you look at the evolution here on the forecast, that continues to be a factor all the way through the middle of the month. So what this shows, and let me pause this here, and let's just go 10 days. Actually, you know what? Let's do 5 days out. 5 days out, you start to see that transport getting a little bit stronger. Still a little bit weak down here around 100 millibars and 200 millibars. But you're starting to see that influence really start to impact the stratosphere. All right? And remember, the stronger, the longer the vector, the stronger the influence. 10 days out, that becomes even more impressive. But in this scenario right here, you're not having the strongest influence just yet because it's basically remaining in the mid-latitudes of the stratosphere, but you are starting to see some influence in the higher latitudes. Then, as you get towards the end of the forecast, you start to see more and more support for basically a stretching of that polar vortex. Now, if you're looking for major stratospheric warming, what you want to see is not only this strong influence here, you want to see these vectors really pointing towards 60, 70, and 80 in the latitudes, but you also want to see in the heat flux this all bright yellow. So when you see that in this scenario, that's when you reach your stratospheric warming event and complete disruption and breakdown of the polar vortex. I want to stress right now, I don't see a lot of support for that to happen, at least not right now, at least not for the next 2 weeks. Can that evolve? Yes. But what I do see is observational support for stretching and weakening of the polar vortex gradually. And let me see here if I can find the right one. I have too many miles up. It's in one of these. Okay, so what I'm looking for, if I can find it, is that one where I had the polar vortex up. Where are you? Oh, there it is. Of course, it's the first one. Okay, so what the European guidance is doing at 10 millibars with the stratospheric warming, a lot of people are pointing out this feature right here. Okay, it's pretty robust, but you'd have to see massive expansion of this and this completely collapsing. Now the GFS tries to hint at that taking shape. It's very similar to European up to about 10 days out. And then it features this warming event. But I stress, in order to really see that take hold, we really need to see the EP flux really intensify. So right now, I don't think it's wise to hope or to advertise a major stratospheric warming event right now. Maybe towards the end of the month, maybe. But for right now, I don't see that support. But I do see the support for stretching of the polar vortex. And what that opens up with the MJO in phases 8, 1, 2, and 3 is more influence from polar and Arctic air masses into our weather pattern, limitation of the weather patterns we have right now, and a disruption of that jet streak coming across the Pacific. So it opens up the potential for winter storms. It opens up the potential for interaction between the subtropical jet stream and polar jet stream. But I can't guarantee anything. And certainly there's no support right now for a strong, sustained negative NAO pattern. Weak to moderate, sure. For a short period of time, sure. Transient, absolutely. But not sustained. And not sustained cold in terms of like weeks of cold weather. Instead, I see something where like you get 3 or 4 days of cold weather, it moderates, and in that time period you can end up with some snowfall or wintry mix or something of that nature. As far as the weather pattern over the next couple of days, okay, so first of all, we're keeping an eye on Sunday evening into Monday. This does not look like a major snow or rain event, but I am seeing support, there it is, on Sunday evening of frontogenesis and enough cold air in place with enough moisture hanging around to support a period of light snow. So we're talking about a trace to maybe an inch on the coastal plain, maybe 1-2 inches, maybe 3 inches at most for the higher elevations. One thing that kind of caught my attention was this feature right here around the Poconos. That's a signal of strong rising air via the warm front just to the south. So yeah, we could see a bit of a burst on Sunday evening, and Monday morning could definitely feature some slick roadways. So we're definitely going to be watching that to see if there's anything more mischievous than what we're seeing right now. And then the next feature, is the potential storm period, either the 12th, the 15th. Here's the thing with all these storm potentials that we are watching between now and, let's say, the 17th. And that is that this pattern is progressive, that it is on the move. And what that means is that these ridge axes over the west coast, they don't stay in place, because every ridge features a trough right on the way. Now, the best way to describe this is that right now we have this jet stream marching across right here. So that sends storms into the west coast that start to weaken as they move across the country and transport a lot of Pacific air. So what's essentially happening is that as this jet streak starts to get kinked up and tossed up, it's like a guy holding a rope, in the gym when they do that, the rope exercises. Well, that's essentially what's happening to this jet stream. And so that wave of troughs and ridges are going to be marching across the United States, basically for next week. And so what that introduces is potential and a lot of storm signals in the model guidance. If everything comes together just right, it's essentially a thread the needle type scenario where these storms are marching across the country. If the cold air interacts with these storms at just the right time, yeah, you could get a nice little snowstorm. Nothing fast. If you see anything in the guidance that has a storm stalling off the coast or anything of that nature, that's going to be garbage, because the whole pattern is progressive. The whole pattern keeps moving. So until you get past this point and establish a new weather pattern, which I think we'll do after the 15th, you can't really look for or expect major winter storms of 6+ inches and stuff like that unless you get a literally perfect scenario that lasts for maybe 6 hours, if that. So in this setup, yeah, there is potential out there for a pretty good storm around the 15th. And this is a nice little signal here showing up in the ensemble guidance here. But notice, you see how spread out these low pressure systems are in this scenario? Well, what that basically means is that this all depends on timing between the short waves in this setup. Okay, so there's your storm trying to set up here. And the development of that low pressure system would be dependent on how this feature up here dives into the back end of this low pressure system and this trough to tilt it negative to pull it up to coastal plain. So what this is telling me is that in the scenarios where it's further west, the trough dives in, the shortwave dives in on the backside of the trough, tilts it negative, tracks it over the coastal waters. If it doesn't do that in time, basically it's out in the Atlantic, and maybe it's some snow around Raleigh, North Carolina, for example, or Virginia, but then it misses the rest of the mid-Atlantic completely and heads out to sea. So again, timing. So yes, is there potential? Yes. Are there storms out there that need to be watched? Yes. Am I confident? No. Not in any way, shape, or form. Once we get into the MJO phases of 8, 1, and 2, which, let me go back here, which takes us beyond the 15th and towards the end of the month, so this time period right here, that's when I think we'll have the better potential of seeing more high latitude blocking, a slower weather pattern, and yes, the potential for winter storms. I want to stress again, this does not mean I'm saying that I expect the same type of Arctic air that we experienced in December returning, not unless we see a much stronger disruption and warping of the polar vortex than the current data suggests right now. But I do like the idea that if you're looking for winter storms in terms of tropical forcing, this is a signal you'd want to see. So that is essentially my thoughts for this evening, and so now I'm going to go and answer your questions and basically take all of your questions. We'll start with the, of course, premium chat, of course, and answer all the questions in here. Let's see here. Joshua X's, what is happening with the global winters in the Northern Hemisphere the last number of years, especially in Eastern U.S. and Europe with mild winters? When will we get back to normal winters of the past? Oh, this is a loaded question because, okay, here's what I've learned about the difference between climatology and people's references of winters of the past. And that is that they tend to overblemish the cold active years and think that any year not like that is unusual. The winters we've had the past couple of years are pretty much on track of what you would expect with the La Nina. Okay? Anytime you have a strong ENSO, either a strong El Nino or strong La Nina, you're going to end up with a mild winter. Anytime you have a polar vortex that's strong, you're going to end up with mild conditions. The winters, like 2009, 2010, where you had a generally weak ENSO influence and you had severe disruption of the polar vortex, that's where you had all your major snowfall events. There is a consideration that you have to give as far as global warming and the influence of winters. But we aren't at that point right now in terms of that influence to say that, we can't see a major above normal snowfall winter. In fact, in 2009, 2010, and in other active winters before this, global warming was blamed on, was used as a reasoning for the snowfall. So I wouldn't go that route. What I would say is that when you have a La Nina like what we do, and it's weakening, but at the same time you have factors right now that that feature warm weather pattern, you tend to think that this would be the whole winter as a whole. The truth of the matter is that it's not. We already saw what can happen when you disrupt a polar vortex in December. And we already discussed, as far as December, the difference between this winter being considered a blockbuster winter and one that not so much is essentially 3 hours difference in the phasing of that storm before Christmas. That's essentially the difference. So, if you really want to think about it, the difference between a blockbuster winter and a not so much blockbuster winter sometimes comes down to the interaction of short waves that are separated by 3 hours, at least so far. We have had winters where it hit 60s, 95, 96, had some days that hit the temperatures, especially early on between the early storms. Yes, Card, absolutely, that is a great point, where we had very cold Decembers, we had a warm up in early January, caused a lot of flooding, and then we had our another string of winter storms again. That's absolutely true, and it can happen. It certainly can happen. Looking at Earth News School, it looks like there is a low around 50 north, 50 west mark forming from the surface up to 500 millibars, even a bit up to 250 millibars. So let's take a look at 500, actually, 200 millibars. Okay, so you're talking about this feature right out here, and we'll go down to 850 millibars. We are seeing a lot of below normal heights out here. The problem is that it's displaced a little bit too far to the north. It's not really strong enough either compared to the rest of the pattern here. This right here is just creating too much of a disruption to really be a factor for this feature up here for right now. But we'll keep an eye on it and see how it evolves. Over the past 3 days or so, sunspots have lessened and are either stable or deteriorating. There may be one on the far side. Yes. Right now, let's see here. Where was that? Here it is. The sunspots that we have been watching, yes, they are more stable. Earlier on, about 2 days ago, they were more active, a little bit more unstable, but we are starting to move back into a little bit more of a quiet temporary period for a couple of days. With 10 millibars strengthening 70 millibars, while part of it has taken a bit of a shape of the 10 millibars, is still very spread out. Yeah, there's still a pretty significant difference between what we're seeing at 10 millibars, which we're seeing right here. I mean, that's a pretty strong vortex right there. But you can already start to see some of that stretching we're talking about. And then 70 millibars. Not as strong, but still, still far better than what it was a couple of weeks ago. So you're seeing some of the influence that we're talking about, especially with EP Flex, but it needs to be a little bit weaker to get us to where we want to be. Do you see any potential for decoupling of the stratospheric vortex and jet stream from the stratospheric vortex? Not right now. If we're going to see that, what you would have to see is basically a massive stratospheric warming event. That's essentially what you have to see to get that point right now. 2004, 2005, I recall that we had a very warm first half of January, and then it got very cold with good snowstorms mid-month, and then it was cold and wintry for a while. Yep, that is true. It was also a year where we had a collapsing end snow event, and everything started to fall together just right. that is a potential here. I am not saying that's not a potential. There is a ton of cold air over Siberia. Yes, some very, very cold air in Siberia. If we get, and in fact, here, let me pull up the temperatures here. Okay, so this is some incredibly cold air up here around Siberia. And the question that we are looking to see is whether or not we can get that cross-polar flow to return for late January and February to get that type of cold air to drop into North America. Is it possible? Sure. Right now, I don't have the data to support that, but yes, it is. There is that potential. The freezer right now is closed, but if it opens up, then things could definitely change. Let's see here. Early 70s, we up until 76, we had mild winters with not much snow. Yep. Snow boss axes. Like in 2019-20, when you have finally had to admit winter wasn't happening, when do you think you'll have to call it if the winter isn't really going to happen like these other meteorologists? Okay, that is a great question, and it really comes down to what I am looking for with this EP flux. So let me pull that back up here. Okay, so in this scenario, okay, let's say we get to 5 days out, right? And this doesn't verify. Instead, what we get is that zonal flow again that we were seeing around Christmas. Or we get out to this point, which is January 14th, and this feature doesn't pan out. And instead, we have very weak vortexes, and we get a strengthening polar vortex and everything consolidates again. That would be a bad sign, and that would be a scenario where the EP flux is failing and that the stratosphere remains cold, and the polar vortex, even if it weakens, it wouldn't really have an influence until mid-February, if that. That's when I would be like, okay, this winter is such that it looks like the timing was just off, and so everything fell apart. So if I don't see that stretching in the polar vortex take hold and start to, alter and influence the weather pattern by around the 15th of January, that is when we have to basically pull the plug. If we had social media like now, winter would have been declared over after that warm run in January 1996. That is true. We need to stop using 95-96. We are having nothing like that winter. By this time back then, I already had 20 inches of snow on our way up to 75 inches. We are at 1.5 inches now, not happening. I can definitely understand that point of view, Snow. And like I said, when I was discussing that winter, I said I was not expecting the same type of snowfall amounts, but I was saying that the potential was out there. The same lifting parameters are out there. This year, it's clearly not happening like 95-96, especially for December. In December, you had, I believe, 3 winter storms over the interior and a lot of wintry mix rain on the coastal plain. So in terms of the coastal plain, still out there, but for the interior, I definitely get your point. Absolutely. Good evening, Stephen. This is from Rob Allen. It has been very interesting to read the thoughts on weather Twitter regarding the potential of a strong stratospheric warming event towards late January, early February. Are you buying in that one will happen, or are you in the camp that it's just stretched to partly stretched? Okay, so I think it's incredibly stupid to make a declaration either way. And you know me, I don't like to be very angry or very declarative with other meteorologists. But to say it's definitely going to do this, or there's no way that the stratosphere is going to warm, and major stratospheric warming event can't happen, or it definitely will happen. We don't have enough data to say either way. There's hints that one could pan out. You could take those hints and say, well, that may be more stretching, or it could be the start of a major stratospheric warming event. But we don't know. And to make a declarative statement like this can't happen, or it just won't happen, and therefore warm winter and that's it, is so incredibly short-sighted because you don't have the data to really back that up. What you can say is that as of right now, the data would suggest that it's easier to have a stretched polar vortex than to have a strong stratospheric warming event that completely breaks apart and blows up the polar vortex. You could definitely make that argument that it is harder to do the major stratospheric warming event as opposed to just having a stretching. That makes sense. That you could say. But to say it's impossible, well, it belies what we know about the atmosphere and all the history that we have studied over the years. So it could see the problem with that is that you say that to energy producers, you say that to individuals who rely on purchasing the oil and gas for the winter and for the next month. And you say it can't happen, won't happen, blah, blah, blah. And then they're caught with their pants down. You end up with a Texas situation where everyone is caught unprepared. And it doesn't need to be like that. Sometimes it's better to say, I'm not sure, we need more data, than to make declarative statements that can mislead people and put them in a bad position to be prepared. Okay, so that's what I would say. And you're welcome, Snowballs, for the explanation. Let's check out YouTube and let's see. Holy smokes, we have a lot of busy information. Okay, so let's read some of the earlier Twitter regarding your prediction for the winter. Sorry, I'm just frustrated by the cold air so fleeting. Okay, so let me discuss this cold air fleeting thing. One thing, if you remember from the winter forecast, I said that we'd see a moderation around the middle of January. To be fair, I was off by a week, and that forecast was back from late September and October. I thought that, okay, we'll see cold active pattern, potential for storms, and then we'll see a relaxation in the pattern by about, say, January 7th through the 15th. I was off by a week. It turns out it's basically from January 1st through the 7th, and then we start to pick up again. So yeah, I was off by about a week, maybe 10 days on that idea. But I always thought that we'd see this relaxation. I was not prepared for 70. Okay, I definitely wasn't. But I did like the idea of a relaxation because, as I've always said, at least in the northern mid-Atlantic, the myth of the sustained cold winter weather pattern for all 3 months, it's just that. It's a myth. It doesn't happen. The only way you're going to have it happen is if we have a supervolcano and everything's blocked out by ash. So it isn't happening, or we get a little ice age. So if you want a little ice age, but you can't grow anything, that's how you get a sustained winter for 3-4 months of all cold air. You always have a relaxation. This is because we are in what's called the temperate zone. Okay? But at the same time, your temperate zone is what gives you your major winter storms. Those battles between warm air and cold air fighting it out, right? So I would not say don't be frustrated by it. Utilize it. What do I mean by that? Hey, this is a great time to get your decorations down for Christmas. You want to get a golf game in. Get ready for the spring season. You want to get one golf game in, whatnot. This is the time to do it. Get some stretching in, because when those snowstorms hit, you're gonna definitely wish for those 60s and 70s again. Is it normal for it to be this warm for January? It's certainly above normal temperatures, but we've seen this before. This is nothing that's like This is not outside of the climatological norm of what we've seen over decades. You can go back to the 50s and actually they made a movie about this, White Christmas, where it was so warm in December, Vermont had no snow. It had a whole movie, really good dance, really nice. What's it called? Music. What's it called? A music movie, whatever. It was a lot of fun. Okay, so definitely watch that. White Christmas, and you could see them back then saying, "Hey, where's the snow in Vermont?" So this isn't like that unusual. Let's see. What do you think about this past holiday's weather in relation to our power grid? I understand that since a lot of coal generation went to natural gas, gas demand shot up. So yeah, I'm reading over a lot of it. Okay, so basically what we saw this Christmas with the demand on energy is basically my argument for why we need more nuclear power stations. Then we wouldn't have this issue so much. So I'll just leave it at that. I wasn't surprised. I was more disappointed than anything else. Not at the people that actually work for those energy companies. I'm talking about just overall our energy portfolio and the way that we generate energy as a country. If we followed France, yes, France, we wouldn't be in this scenario at all. Let's see here. The snowfall for Sunday, it has the potential for some snowflakes in central New Jersey. I'll know more as we get a little bit closer. I want to get a look at this threat in the NAM model guidance and the HRR guidance. You get a better idea on the front of Genesis. Because I think what we could be setting up here is a brief burst of snow on the front end of this low pressure system as it approaches Sunday evening before it changes over to rain on the coastal plain. But I think it remains all snow. Again, I'm not looking at this as a major event, but more of a nuisance. I want to see the 0Z GFS and watch Twitter blow up. Yeah. Let me just give you guys a warning with any of these storm potentials out there. The models, do not be surprised if a couple of models put out some epic winter storm or something like that. Do not trust anything until we get under 120 hours. Otherwise, it might show up for a run and then disappear and never return again. So I'm just giving you that warning so you don't have a heart attack when it disappears. Is this pattern more likely to produce ice storms than snow? Oh, that's a great one. I think that this pattern is more likely to produce those Cade ice events for Pennsylvania, specifically to south of the Poconos and west of Philadelphia, and a lot of wintry mix events on the coastal plain, than widespread snowfall events. And even with that, if you get a snowfall event out of this scenario, it's a fast-moving storm, i.e., it comes in, drops a lot of heavy precipitation, and gets out of here in under 6 hours. So don't be surprised to get a storm coming in at 8 a.m. By 2 p.m., it's already done. Could you say we could see one snowstorm for the whole winter? I could definitely see that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If the polar vortex stretches only a little bit and then consolidates again, and we don't see that again until we get into February, with a weak MJO state, yeah, I can only see one winter storm out of that. I could see this whole winter turning around with a more major disruption of the polar vortex. MJO's in phase 1, 2, and 3, and then we get like 4 storms in a row. I'm not saying that will happen, but it's in the realm of possibility. You get 4 winter storms, and all this talk about winter canceled and the worst winter ever is gone because you got 4 storms that produce 6 to 12 inches for each one, and you end up with above normal snowfall in a span of a 3 or 4 week period. Happened before, it'll happen again. So it's in the realm of possibility. I'm not saying it will happen, but certainly a possibility. Let's see what else we got here. Back to the premium chat here. We've had some good winter storms when the vortex has been stretched rather than disrupted. Absolutely. Depends how it stretches and where. Great point. Okay, so let me pull that up. Where are you? Okay, so if our polar vortex gets stretched like this towards North America, it's doable. We can work with it. Okay? If you get the polar vortex stretched and it ends up more towards Europe or it ends up more towards the Pacific, then what you end up with then is a powerful trough here and a large ridge over much of North America. So, yes, the position of the stretched polar vortex is extremely important. Now, so far, all the guidance I've been seeing has been a stretch from Siberia towards North America. So I don't really see that as being a threat of dropping towards the Pacific. But again, it is something that we will be keeping an eye on. Is the speed of the collapse of the La Nina influencing the time frame for what you had initially forecasted? La Nina failing a bit quicker, speeding up things overall. Let me see. How do I... La Nina's evolution pretty much is on par for what I thought it would be. The wild card has been more about how the stratosphere has evolved, in which I thought that the stretching was going to last a little bit longer, and it didn't. And so it consolidated a little bit faster and brought upon the warmer pattern a little bit faster. Let's see. Musical. That was it, yes. For its worth, hunters have been bagging deer with hefty fat from them in PA. Yeah, that's definitely true. With this pattern, it seems more than 3 days out is chancy given how short a time difference is needed, matter of several hours. Absolutely. And this is why it's not because of skill. It's not that I can't forecast a storm 5-7 days out. It's because I recognize the difficulty involved and why, while I understand what the model guidance is trying to do, sometimes in order to be a good forecaster, you have to know what your limitations are. And while it's exciting to be the first to have a snow map out or the first to pick out a storm threat or weather pattern, it's better and more responsible to understand what your limitations are in a pattern and to forecast accordingly. And to let people know, like, hey, look, these are our limitations. This is what can change, and this is what we need to be prepared for. You had noted that if the December storm had come together before Christmas, it would have set up blocking for the next couple of weeks. After it didn't, and the pattern collapsed. That's essentially the story so far. That's literally the story right now. Because if the storm before Christmas, with our Arctic air mass, had interacted in such a way that it had interacted with the subtropical jet stream shortwave, it would have forced the whole storm on the East Coast. That storm would have lifted up towards the Canadian Maritimes, set up a 50-50 low, and set up the next storm that was coming in that ended up being a very weak storm. But still, the blocking in the scenario of that shortwave would have led to another storm, probably a moderate winter storm. And then the other shortwave that is giving us rain now, that would have been a winter storm as well. And then the pattern would have weakened. Because that interaction was off by just a little bit, the whole thing collapsed. I just hope we get one big snowstorm so I can have fun while plowing it. Well, that's true. That'd definitely be a lot of fun. I always enjoy forecasting for it. Let's see what else we have here. So far, some great questions, guys. Absolutely outstanding job. We got about another 10 minutes, and then we'll call it a night. As you know what I'm noticing? The warmer the winters are, the more that, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but my voice tends to go a lot faster. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because of just the colds and whatnot around. I mean, I'm fine. I feel fine, but my throat tends to go faster when I'm talking a lot like this.
Because of the air being drier?
Maybe.
I mean, I know I have problems, so.
That could be it. Definitely drier air. Definitely, that could be a factor. Oh, wow. Well, again, it's almost 9 o'clock on January 4th, and it is 61 degrees in Reading. Alrighty then, that's some warm air. It is getting foggy out there too. Visibility is falling. Down towards southern New Jersey is below a mile. So if you're down in Atlantic City, Wildwood, there's some very foggy conditions out there. So I'm kind of concerned about the morning commute tomorrow. So definitely just be careful out there if you're driving, because some rather warm conditions out there and rather foggy conditions. So definitely a concern. If we do get a big storm, will you live cast it like you did last January? I will attempt to. I always try to. It's a matter of three things. One, will I pass out while trying to do all 24 hours of a storm?
I don't think so. You get too excitable.
Yeah, I'll have plenty of coffee too. Two, will I lose my voice? And three, will I have power? That's the big one. That's the big one. Will I have if I lose power, because I'm in an apartment, there's not much I can do about it. By the way, changes are on the way on that, so stay tuned. But I know I'm not saying where. Okay.
You can't say anything.
Okay, fine. I won't say much more beyond that. But anyway, those would be the three factors that would limit that. Expect you don't want what happened with Jeremy Renner and the snowplow. Yeah, no one wants that. That's just rough.
What a rough start to 2023, right?
Right? 2023 has really been rough. Oh my God. Football players, Hollywood. I'm like, God, put everyone in bubble wrap. My God.
We'll all roll around in hamster balls.
Right? It's crazy. It's crazy. This 2023, start of 23 has been absolutely bonkers, okay? Want a storm that lasts a few days like 96? No. All right. It's great to have a storm that lasts several days when you're a kid. Not so much when you're an adult, for several reasons. One, as a meteorologist trying to forecast for several days, I don't think I could stay up that long. No. And it's so taxing on the infrastructure.
Is incredibly draining for you.
Yeah. You see what type of impact it has on the infrastructure, on the elderly and whatnot. It can be, it's not fun.
Had that here.
Yeah.
Had that living here.
We've been stranded for 3-4 days. Yeah, because they couldn't plow us out. So, yeah, that's not fun. As much as I understand the excitement and whatnot, but I sincerely hope that does not happen. But then again, now that I've said that, of course, I probably jinxed it.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. Well, I think that's it for tonight. I think we got our questions in. We'll keep an eye on the storm threats as we look at Sunday night and Monday. I'll have more details for that as we move along through the week. And I think once we get under the 90-hour time period, we'll start to get a better idea on the European guidance, and then under 60 hours out on the NAM guidance, and we'll see what to expect with the storm. As far as the other storm potentials, Beware of the phantom storm that keeps on showing up in the guidance. Yes, it looks pretty, but it probably is fool's gold for right now. Until we get under 120 hours, we get a better idea on the interaction of these short waves, which let me just go back and just show you this. Okay, in this scenario, and I'll just be real fast with this. In this scenario, the problem with this setup is this ridge is moving, this trough is moving, everything is moving. So in this setup, the only way that you have this storm be moving up the coast is if this shortwave right here comes in, causes this to tilt negative rapidly before it gets kicked out in the Atlantic. Far too many moving pieces. So yeah, it looks pretty. There's a potential out there, but I warn you, don't trust the full gold until you're under 120 hours out and you get a better idea on what to expect with these short waves. On that, I think we'll call it a night. Thank you, as always, for joining the chat and for following along. I really appreciate it. And as always, so I look for this, stay safe